So James Steele Jr., born in Missoula, raised in raised in R. Lee, but spent a lot of time in St. Ignatius. Graduated from R. Lee High School. Of course, Dad was a BIA police officer, so I spent time Quinault Reservation, Coeur d'Alene Reservation, and in our own reservation. So the majority of my life, I've grown up on a reservation, whether it's our reservation or Coeur d'Alene or Quinault. Thinking about all of the things that were going on from 1900 forward, just generally speaking, we know we had, more of a chieftain type government, but somewhere in the 1900s, there became more of a general council form of government where each community had a number of representatives, and I couldn't find anything that said a specific number. It really was anybody that came to that meeting was a part of that meeting. So it really was more of a general council form of government. They had a president. They elected a president from time to time. But the issues that were confronting us at that time was the allotment and homesteading of the reservation, 1910, the irrigation project being established, the bison range being established, the site for the eventual dam, SKQ dam, formerly Kerr Dam, all of that, and then enrollment issues, constitutional change, the Indian Reorganization Act, all of that, was during that early part of the 20th century. The General Council had a business committee that was established that had a smaller membership, and I think it was 5. The Indian agent was pretty much the de facto chairman of that committee. That committee had a lot of authority over the land transactions, enrollment, those are the main things. And I have seen minutes where it talked about business committee minutes where they were hiring the individuals that would go across the reservation and survey different allotments for tribal members. That was part of that business committee. Now you have to remember 1935 was the Indian Reorganization Act. I keep slurring that, sorry. Indian Reorganization Act ended the dominance of the Indian agent. Prior to that, the Indian agent was pretty much the de facto dictator. If you wanted to leave the reservation, if you had transactions that were handled at the Indian agent's office, he could tell you whether you could buy something or not. Essentially, he was the judge, the police, everything. So he was the de facto over this business committee, and the business committee was challenged quite often. As you go back and look through the minutes, you would have somebody from the General Council challenging the validity of that business committee and its actions. I remember one meeting I saw the guy saying, "You do not have authority to meet the General Council. This is their authority to do that." And so you had people like Sam Resurrection sending letters, very prolific letter writer, opposing the homesteading, opposing the irrigation project, opposing all of those different things that were set up. So the General Council form of government, they did have a lobbyist. They had a lawyer in D.C. that was to be the tribe's lobbyist during this time, 1900 to 1920s. But the Indian agent wouldn't allow the General Council to spend money to pay him. The tribes wanted to use their own money to pay for this lawyer in D.C., but they wouldn't do it. But then mysteriously the feds go after him and go after his law license. And I'm like, this just seemed pretty weird. I mean, he wants to represent the tribes, but we did have a lawyer back in those days trying to help oppose the homesteading. Chief Charlo was, kind of one of those leads. But there's that time and time again where they went back to D.C., train trip to D.C. and try to meet with anybody they could to get this stopped. But the problem was you had this business committee that was approving a lot of that. The general counsel was opposing it, but then you had the Indian agent colluding with the process to get it approved. So we went from the general counsel form of government, and then, of course, the Roosevelt administration came in the early 30s. John Collier was kind of the main Indian Affairs director at that time. And he kind of had this paternalistic benevolence towards Indian people. He wanted them to be self-sufficient, but yet still have that paternalistic hand over them. And so when you look at, and Senator Burton K. Wheeler was also, he was a member of the United States Senate, but he was also of a similar mindset. But the Wheeler-Howard Act, which is the IRA, is named after Senator Wheeler. Interestingly enough, he wanted the Indians to be self-sufficient, but he didn't want them to be too self-sufficient. And so he later on, after the Wheeler-Howard Act was approved, he later on was trying to get it not redacted, but canceled or rescinded. He wanted it to be rescinded. He thought it was too progressive for Indians and self-determination. So that was an interesting thing that I've read as well about Senator Wheeler's kind of backing up on Indian self-determination. But some important things about the IRA. We are the first tribe in the nation to formally adopt the IRA. The IRA did a few important things. One is it stopped the homesteading, the allotment and the homesteading of the reservation. That stopped. It took the power away from the Indian agent and gave it to the tribal council, a lot of that. It also set up a tribal council of 12 members, 10 members and the 2 chiefs, named the chiefs in the Constitution. It set up a number of districts. It divided the reservation up in a number of districts. And we went from a president as our main executive chief political leader to a chairman. And so in 1935, that was voted on by the membership and adopted, and it ultimately came into effect in 1936. And the first election for that council was in 1936. And they established, selected the chairman and all of those things. So we went from, we have what we have presently is a unitary form of government. It's more like, and Mickey Pablo said this back in the 90s, and he called it a parliamentary form of government. And me being a political science governmental person, I started doing comparative governmental analysis even before I had a degree in politics from the University of Montana. I really wanted to know how our government worked with the state government and the federal government and how that interaction went along. And it always seems strange to me that we have this unitary form of government, which is a parliamentary system. We do not have the power of judicial review. That's a pretty important hallmark to U.S. government. The state government of 3 branches. We do not have an inherent power of judicial review. The council one of the council powers and duties is to establish an Indian court. The council has ultimate authority over the court. Good or bad, that's what we have. And my grandma Josephine was on the Constitution Review Committee in the 70s with Doug Allard and all those folks. The council thought it would be good to establish a Constitution Review Committee. Okay. So these are my notes that I didn't know I wrote down back whenever. So it would be a good idea, the council decided, to appoint the Constitution Review Committee as a type of organization to deal with the issues of review and to come up with alternatives to the present Constitution. When we started as a committee, I had very little, as did the committee, idea in what way to proceed. The committee quickly decided that the committee needed to first educate itself concerning the present CSKT Constitution. The committee spent a year reading the document and analyzing the meaning of each article. There were experts that were brought in to help advise the committee on its deliberations. It seemed that there were many individuals on the committee that believed that if they couldn't get their own personal view passed or implemented, they wouldn't be involved in the process. When we got to the issue of enrollment, we decided to let that issue stand for a later time. If we would have dealt with that enrollment issue at the beginning, I believe the process of review would have been stalled and the committee wouldn't have finished the draft document. And the committee met. I was selected the chairman and served as chairman of that review process for 2 or 3 years, 3 years I think. And when we did that review, we went to every community on the reservation. We did surveys, we talked to elders, we talked to council members that would visit with us and former council members, former chairmen and such. We talked to judges, tribal judges, defenders. We talked to anybody that would pretty much visit with us about the tribal constitution and their thoughts about it. And did a pretty rigorous review process. I know there was disagreements with some that said the committee did too much, but we couldn't get any direction as to what our limitations were to be. So we reviewed the whole thing. Just, okay, do the whole thing. The one thing that we didn't review was the enrollment, because the committee was split over that, the issue of enrollment. And ultimately the split family secretarial election came out of, was birthed out of this constitution review process. But the review completed everything else. All the other articles were done and went to a more kind of a U.S. model, 3 branches of government type of model. There was a move across the country during that time. Tribes and goes back to a question that was asked, did we look at other constitutions in the 90s when we reviewed ours? Yes, we did. There was a number of them that were going to the 3 branches of government, the U.S. model. And as time went along, there was the success of those governments was, because they changed the Constitution doesn't necessarily mean you change the personality of the people that you put in those governments. The U.S. model is that. It's a model. It's not perfect. But honestly, we've governed ourselves for hundreds and thousands of years before we had a document written down how we were supposed to govern ourselves. It's not the paper that you write your constitution on that makes you a successful people. It's your people and the integrity of your people. The IRA constitution that we have, in my opinion, is not that great. It's not a, it's a very clunky, very paternalistic document. And having served on council with that document, it just seemed to be, we've been doing so many things progressively as a tribe in terms of self-governance. We are a self-governance tribe. We have taken all of the ability to govern our own affairs to the nth degree that we can. The Indian Self-Determination Act in the middle 70s, Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, I think there's a long form of it. But our first program that we compacted was the education program. And then we went through to the land services and all of those things. And so when you think about the Constitution that we have, that we operate under presently, it's an IRA Constitution that is what we call the term boilerplate, meaning it's copied to other IRA tribes. Blackfeet has a real similar one. Not all tribes adopted the IRA. Some didn't, some did. But, all in all, having gone through the Constitution review process where we rewrote the whole thing except for the enrollment section, I think we did a good job at it. And it didn't, we brought it back to the council and it got tabled and it really didn't go anywhere. But I think it was a good effort. In terms of the big things that we went after, at that time we felt it was important to have checks and balances. So we did the 3 branches and give some sort of judicial review. We felt that there should be somewhere, somehow, an inclusion of or recognition of the elders, the chiefs. We felt like were that acknowledgement of having our elders committees, cultural committees. And so we felt like we need to address that somehow. So we went to both culture committees and talked to them, say, hey, what do you think about having the chiefs again? And he said, no, it's gone. It's too far past. We don't need to go back to that. And so we went through and did this Elders Advisory Committee to kind of acknowledge that. The other thing is the district boundaries too. At the time, having a more, so we took the districts and just drew lines laterally across the res, have 4 districts, and have 2 per district, and then 2 at large, the chair and the vice chair elected at large. And those are the main highlights that I can remember from that review process. Generally, we didn't have to vote on a lot of things, even though you'll see in the minutes there's a lot of voting. That was mostly for the record, but generally it was unanimous after we had some discussions. But when it came to enrollment, it was just clear split. We spent a number of meetings trying to work through that, and finally, let's just put Article 2 aside for now. Let's get the document reviewed. Let's work on the whole thing, get it done, and then come back. Because my fear was we would never get anything done. But the other thing that I forgot to mention in the IRA is the establishment of the adoption of the corporate charter. The corporate charter was pretty important in terms of that's the authority of the council to do the business part of what council does. When a council sits as a shareholder meeting, if you see that in minutes, council sat as a shareholder meeting. There is one share of all these different tribal corporations. The tribal council holds it, one share for the membership collectively. So all of us have in EKI, the bank, gaming, and etc., There's one share. The shareholder is the tribal council. The tribal council operates under that authority through that corporate charter, which was adopted right around the same time. Side thing. But just real quickly, as we think about the IRA Constitution, and we kind of talked about that a little bit, but you know, when you look at the IRA, you have the preamble that sets out the kind of the general reason of the existence of the document. The territory, it explains pretty much that set by the Treaty of Hellgate of 1855, the territory of that this Constitution will govern. The Article 2 is the membership of the tribes, the enrollment of the tribes, and that talks about who can be a member of the tribe. And then we have adopted the 1/4 degree enrollment for our tribes. Article 3, the Tribal Council, is pretty much the main governing part of our tribes, and it talks about the establishment. Section 1, the governing body of the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes of the Flathead Reservation shall be the Tribal Council. So there we move from the general council form of government to a more limited number. The Section 2, the council should consist of 10 councilmen elected from the districts as set forth hereafter, and chiefs Martin Charlo and Inez Paul Custada, the Salish and Kootenai chiefs. I'm not entirely sure why we don't have a chief of the Pend Oreille listed, but they are included in the treaty process. Why that happened, I do not know. I don't know, and I haven't run across. It'd be really interesting to see minutes or documents talking about why we had a Pend Oreille chief left out. Section 3 is the districts, so representation from the districts, Jocko Valley, which we call the Arlee District, Mission District, have 2 council members each, Ronan, Pablo, Polson, Elmo, Dayton, Hot Springs, Camas Prairie, and Dixon shall have 1 member each. And then we get into Section 4, the council shall have the power to change the districts and the representation from each based on community organization or otherwise as deemed advisable. So the council in the last few years have taken the extra seat from Jocko Valley District, Arlee District, and the St. Ignatius District. Though both of those had 2, now they just have 1, but now they are both at large. So Tom McDonald was elected at at-large district out of Ronan. He's an at-large member. The extra seat in Arlee will become at-large this next council election, and I think that that's this next year. So that's the authority that they've made that decision with. The council so organized shall elect from with its own member, chairman, vice chairman, and from within or without its membership, a secretary, treasurer, sergeant at arms, and other such officers and committees as deemed necessary. And so there's the election of the chairman and vice chair from within. And pretty much the way it falls now is the chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer are elected from within the council. The council hires a sergeant at arms. And no person shall be candidate for membership in a tribal council unless shall be member of the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribe. So you have to be a member of the tribes, and you have to reside in the district of your candidacy for a period of 1 year preceding the next election. So you have to live in your district. If you're going to run from the Arlee district, you have to live in that district for a year. With the at-large, then you have to live on the reservation for a year before the election, before you can run for it. Nomination and elections. This talks about the staggering of elections, and what staggering means. A council member shall serve for a 4-year term in this Article 4, Section 1. The term of councilman shall be a period for 4 years. But in the first election with this new constitution, 5 members were elected to 2 years, and 5 were elected to 4 years, meaning that set up the staggered election process where you have 5 up every 2 years. So you don't have all 10 of them up at once. The Article 5, if a councilman or official shall die, resign, permanently leave the res, or be removed from office, council shall declare the position vacant and appoint a successor to fill the unexpired term. There was a period of time where the council, when there was a vacancy, would hold a special election and appoint the winner of that special election. We had a change in leadership where they believed that that wasn't needed anymore. It's not specified here that you hold a special election to fill the vacancy. It's not in this constitution. It's not there. But council had adopted the practice of doing that. Well, the argument was made that it cost too much money and so forth and so on. And at the time when the decision was made to change that process, I wasn't there. I wasn't on the council. But I still think it's important for the people to have the ability to vote for a special election to fill a vacancy. But I think there should be a special election. I think the compromise is if it's a short, within 6 months, then just have letters of interest and nominate. Right. I think the main things you need to think about with this Constitution, particularly as we move to Article 6, Powers and Duties of the Council, you will see, so for instance, Section 1, the Council shall have the power subject to any limitations imposed by the statutes or the Constitution of the United States. So immediately right there, paternalism is, hey, we're here. We're here, and we don't want you to forget that you're a ward of the United States government. And then you go through here and you will see, here's another, the council shall hire their own legal counsel, and so forth and so on. The choice of counsel and fixing of fees shall be subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. You can hire your lawyer, but the Secretary of Interior is going to say yes or no. And then further on down, to manage all economic affairs and enterprises of the Confederated Tribes in accordance with the terms of this charter, to be issued by the Secretary of Interior. That's the corporate charter. That's where the corporate charter comes in. So the tribes moved over to adopt a corporate charter to be able to handle the economic and enterprises of the tribes. Promulgate and enforce ordinances subject to the review of the Secretary of Interior. The other one that I wanted to mention was in the powers and duties here, L, to promulgate and enforce ordinances which shall be subject to the review of the Secretary of Interior, governing the conduct of members of the Confederated Tribes and providing for the maintenance of law and order and the administration of justice by the establishment of an Indian court, defining its powers and duties. So the council, the court serves at the pleasure of the tribal council. It's not a separate entity, not like the United States Supreme Court. There's no power of judicial review. Land is Article 8. And in the old Constitution, it was just a big, long process. The land ordinance was changed. When was that changed? Oh, 1960. Yeah, so this whole section here with all of this land, it's all changed in 1960. The other interesting thing about this is if you want to amend the Constitution, you have to have a secretarial election run by the Secretary of Interior in order to change it. The The bylaws section gets more into the meat and potatoes of the actions of the council day to day. The chairman of the council shall preside over all meetings of the council, perform all duties of chairman, and exercise any authority detailed to him, and he shall be entitled to vote on all questions. So the council basically, he serves at the pleasure of the chairman serves at the pleasure of the council. He does all of those things that the council allows him to do, he or she. The vice chair shall assist the chairman when called on to do so. In the absence of the chairman shall preside, and when so presiding shall have all the privileges and duties and responsibilities of the chairman. So the succession. The chairman's absent, the vice chair fills in. The council secretary keeps copies of the minutes, but the council secretary also keeps copies of all of the corporate documents for all the tribal businesses, and attests to those, and the secretary of the council signs off on those as well. Here's an interesting one I always thought was interesting. The oath of office for new council, I blank do solemnly swear or affirm I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, to carry out faithfully and impartially the duties of my office, and to the best of my abilities to cooperate, promote, and protect the best interests of my tribes in accordance with this Constitution bylaws. I don't know why we have to have, we're not operating under the direct authority of the Constitution of the United States. I always feel like that should be changed to just our customs and our Constitution. Regular meetings of the council, orders of business, ordinances and resolutions. Ordinances, of course, are the tribal laws of the tribes. A resolution is a temporary, more short-term action of the council.
Does an ordinance have to be approved by the Secretary of Interior?
Mm-hmm. And they have pushed that down to, it has to be at least, they can put a note to it if they wanted to, but it's been pushed, that authority it doesn't go to the actual Secretary of Interior in DC. It has been pushed down to the BIA office.
Like a regional area office?
The local superintendent usually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But if somebody along that chain of command really wanted to make an issue of it, they probably could stop it. But all of the governing ordinances and such are generally sent to the BIA and reviewed, and nowadays they just it's just kind of rubber stamp it. They don't really do like in the old days of more formally approving or opposing. I think, I just kind of quickly went through it, but it's not a very big document. It's not very complex. It doesn't address every single thing that the tribe does on a day-to-day basis. It's a 1936 document, but you can change the Constitution 6 times a week and 7 times on Sunday, and if you don't have good ethical people running your government, it isn't going to matter. And we can see that exactly with the United States government. I think the IRA was very important. As I've said before, it was important because it stopped the homesteading, it stopped the allotment, which were real important for us. You look at a land status map even today with the inclusion of the bison range, it is amazing to think. From 1935, some of the very first acts of that new council were to make sure that we bought land back. So from 1935, 36 till even present day, the tribes have been buying land back, paying the taxes on it, putting it into trust, and trying to get the reservation back to as much green, meaning tribal ownership, as possible. And also, in order to amend our Constitution, we have to have a federal election called a secretarial election that the government runs to amend our own Constitution. To change, to adopt a new Constitution, you have to do the same thing. Because we adopted the IRA, we adopted that process for changing our Constitution, and